Hey guys, tonight we're starting something truly thrilling. Brace yourselves because yes, tonight's tale is about paperclips. Now I know what you're thinking. Finally. Finally, someone has the courage to take on the twisted, riveting world of bent wire. And don't worry, this isn't going to get too exciting. In fact, my goal here is the opposite. By the time I've droned through the fourth variation of Norwegian wire patents, you'll be somewhere between light dozing and full-on REM sleep. So settle in. Dim the lights, maybe grab some water and get cozy. Because the history of paperclips is shockingly way longer, pettier, and duller than you'd expect. Which of course makes it absolutely perfect bedtime material. Let's begin not with a paperclip, but with the eternal question. What did people do with loose papers before someone had the bright idea of bending a wire? Well, they mostly stabbed them. Yep, medieval clerks, Renaissance secretaries, even 18th century office drones. They just drove sharp pins through documents to keep them together. You'd have a neat little stack of parchment, and then you'd jab a tiny dagger through it. Practical? Sure. A little dangerous? Definitely. It was basically paperwork cosplay as acupuncture. Now, if you were fancy, you might use ribbon ties, wax seals, or even little string knots to bundle papers. And if you were really fancy, as in French royal court levels of fancy, you'd sometimes commission custom clamps or jeweled clips. Because nothing says I'm drowning in debt and about to be guillotined like a diamond-encrusted binder. But the average clerk wasn't about to waste jewels on his grocery receipts, so stabbing with pins it was. Until finally in the late 19th century someone said, what if, instead of violence, we just folded a piece of wire, and thus the paperclip was born. Now, like all great inventions, from the printing press to sliced bread, the paperclip's origins are clouded in confusion, stolen credit, and unnecessary lawsuits. So who really invented it? Enter Johan Wahler, a Norwegian patent clerk, which feels almost too perfect. Of course, the man who invented a way to organize papers was literally a clerk surrounded by papers. He filed his patent in 1899 for a bent wire contraption designed to hold sheets together. And here's the twist. His design didn't even work that well. It was kind of awkward, didn't grip tightly, and honestly, it looked more like a limp coat hanger than the sleek paperclip we know today. But Norway loves Wahler anyway. In fact, they later turned him into a national symbol, not for filing a successful patent, but for basically having the idea of a paperclip, which is a very Scandinavian way of saying close enough. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Americans were already producing much more practical designs. The gem manufacturing company in England had quietly churned out what we now think of as the classic paperclip by the early 1900s. The gem clip was elegant, cheap, and most importantly, it actually worked, which is why it conquered the world. So in reality, Norway's beloved Johan Wahler is celebrated as the father of the paperclip, but his design was essentially useless. It's kind of like being remembered as the guy who invented a chocolate teapot. Nice effort, but no one's pouring tea in it. And speaking of gem clips, yes, we're going to talk about shapes. Because the paperclip world is not just one loop of wire. Oh no, it is a wild kingdom of shapes, sizes, and petty design competitions. The classic gem has that double oval look, very smooth, very satisfying. But you've also got the Gothic-looking Cushman clip, the triangular Nifty clip, the double loop owl clip. And my personal favorite, the non-skid clip, which has little serrated bumps on it. Because nothing screams cutting-edge technology like a wire that bites your finger while you're filing taxes. Of course, office supply companies tried to market each variation like it was a revolutionary breakthrough. Ads in the early 20th century would brag, "This clip won't slip," or "This one stacks flatter," or "This one won't snag your delicate 1912 silk blouse." Because apparently, fashion and filing were once mortal enemies. Did people actually care? Not really. Most offices just used whatever was cheapest. But the manufacturers were very proud of their bent wires. Somewhere in a dusty archive, there are probably 400-page catalogs devoted entirely to paperclip models. Imagine the poor soul who had to write those. Actually, don't. That might wake you up. Let's float gently now into one of the paperclip's most bizarre chapters. World War II. Norway, occupied by Nazi Germany, needed symbols of quiet resistance. And what did they choose? The paperclip. Because Johann Wahler, their almost but not quite inventor, had become a minor national icon. People began wearing paperclips on their lapels as a subtle sign of defiance, like saying, "All right, let's glide back to safer, duller ground." How about production statistics? The modern world produces billions odd of paperclips every year. That's enough to stretch them end to end around the earth multiple times. Though, of course, no one does that, except maybe bored office workers. Fun fact, paperclips are so standardized that they've become a kind of placeholder for generic object. Economists use them in examples, artists use them in minimalist sculptures. And of course, you probably have a dozen of them in your drawer right now, twisted into weird shapes because you got distracted during a Zoom meeting. And yes, we need to address the most noble role of the paperclip, the emergency tool. Need to reset a Wi-Fi router? Paperclip. Need to pick a lock in a spy movie? Paperclip. Need to eject your SIM card? Paperclip. Honestly, if paperclips vanished tomorrow, tech support would collapse within 24 hours. But let's not get too excited. We'll save the full saga of paperclips as tools for later. For now, let's stay in the warm, soporific comfort of bent wire patents. Speaking of patents, here's where the story gets fun. In the driest way possible. Because after Wahler, dozens of inventors filed competing designs, and the U.S. Patent Office was suddenly flooded with applications for improved paper fasteners. Some were double loops, some were spirals. One even looked like a miniature coat hanger for doll clothes. Most of these designs were promptly forgotten. Why? Because the gem clip worked fine and no one wanted to reinvent the wheel. Or rather, reinvent the oval. Still, every one of those patents is lovingly preserved in the archives, just waiting to bore future historians like me into submission. So if you ever can't sleep, just know there's a whole library of paperclip patents out there. Thousands of pages describing wire angles and loop tensions in exquisite, soul-crushing detail. I can practically hear the yawns already. Now I can sense that you might be drifting off by this point, which is good. That's the point, but just in case you're still awake, let's end this first stretch with something appropriately anticlimactic. The humble paperclip has never really changed in over a century. Sure, we have plastic-coated ones now in bright neon colors. We've got giant novelty clips because someone at Staples thought oversized wires were hilarious. We've even got digital paper clips like that cursed Microsoft Office assistant Clippy. Yes, the smug little guy who popped up to say, "It looks like you're writing a letter." Truly the height of annoyance disguised as helpfulness. But at the end of the day, the gem clip remains king. Quiet, functional, endlessly boring. Just the way we like it. So tonight, as you drift off, you can rest easy knowing that the history of paperclips, with all its forgotten patents, national pride, and occasional resistance symbolism, is as flat and unchanging as the pile of receipts sitting on your desk. And we've only just begun. Hey again. If you're still awake after part 1, first of all, impressive. Second, don't worry, part 2 is going to get even duller. Because tonight we're diving into the wonderfully unexciting world of alternative paperclip designs. Yes, that's right. Not satisfied with a single bend of wire, humanity decided to spend decades coming up with other ways to fold metal around paper. Because if there's one thing humans are good at, it's overcomplicating the simplest possible idea. So let's begin our calm, inevitable descent into the design rabbit hole. First up, the owl clip. Now, don't get too excited by the name. It's not shaped like an owl. There are no adorable wings or googly eyes. It's just a wire bent into 2 side-by-side loops, vaguely resembling, if you squint, the wide eyes of a very tired bird. The owl clip's big selling point was that it held paper extra tight. You'd slide your stack into one loop, and then the second loop reinforced the grip. Revolutionary. Though in practice it meant you basically bent your documents at weird angles and then had to pry them loose with your fingernails. Efficiency at its finest. And yes, they actually marketed this thing as a wise choice, because owls. Office supply companies were not known for their comedy chops. Next, let's float gently into the Cushman clip. This one looked like a Gothic arch, a sort of pointed oval with sharper edges. It was marketed as sleek and modern in the early 1900s, which of course meant it was basically the architectural equivalent of filing your papers inside a church window. Supposedly, the shape allowed documents to slide in with ease. In reality, it made your paperwork curl up at the corners like a sad sandwich wrapper. People used it anyway because once you've patented a wire, you've got to sell it somehow. The Cushman had its moment in the sun, but like most of these experimental clips, it eventually faded into, now my personal favorite, the non-skid clip. This little beauty had tiny teeth, literal serrations, etched into the wire. The idea was to stop papers from slipping, which worked. But it also meant the clip shredded your documents like a miniature cheese grater. Imagine carefully typing up a letter on your 1930s typewriter, aligning every word perfectly, and then jamming it under a serrated wire that left bite marks. Truly a triumph of industrial design. Nothing says professional like handing your boss a memo that looks like it's been mauled by a squirrel. Still, the non-skid clip existed for decades. Some people swore by it, others swore at it. Either way, it proves that yes, you can ruin even the simplest idea with enough determination. Of course, no list would be complete without mentioning the triangular clip, also called the Nifty clip, which is about as aggressively unnifty as anything could be. This design was literally just a triangle of bent wire. The argument was that it saved material and stacked flatter in filing cabinets, which sounds good in theory. But in practice, it snagged on everything, unfolded if you breathed too hard, and generally acted like the rebellious teenager of the clip world. Still, patent lawyers loved it, because you could point to the gem and say, no, no, mine's a triangle. Totally different. Nothing like the legal art of bending geometry to squeeze royalties out of office supplies. And then, the binder clip. Yes, the chunky black metal one with silver arms, technically not a paperclip, but close enough that we should mention it. The binder clip is the bulldozer of paper fastening. Where the gem is light and dainty, the binder clip comes in like a medieval torture device for documents. Whole stacks of paper, no problem. Envelopes, receipts, unpaid bills you don't want to look at, clamp them all in. Of course, binder clips also had a reputation for being mildly aggressive. Put too many together and suddenly your desk looked like it was wearing industrial braces, but people loved them anyway. Some even collected them in different sizes, like Pokemon, but with more accounting energy. And now, because we're really in deep, let's talk about the patent frenzy era. From about 1890 to 1920, inventors were obsessed with filing patents for new paperclip designs. Dozens, maybe hundreds of slightly different loops and bends were submitted to patent offices in the US and Europe. Each one proudly declared to be better, faster, or more efficient than the last. Spoiler alert, almost none of them caught on. Because here's the thing. Once you've invented a bent oval of wire that holds paper securely, you've basically solved the problem. Every extra twist, tooth, or triangle was just showing off. It's the stationery version of putting spoilers on a minivan. Sure, it looks different, but no one asked for it. Of course, some designs weren't even clips. People also experimented with paper fasteners that involved tiny prongs you poked through holes, or brass split pins you bent outward, or even mini screw clamps that made your paperwork look like a steampunk contraption. These were marketed as sturdier alternatives to paper clips, but they also required you to punch holes in your documents, which slightly defeats the point of neatly preserving them. It's like deciding the best way to protect a book is to set it on fire. Technically, it solves one problem, but creates several worse ones. And then there was the Edelman clip. Yes, it deserves its own sleepy spotlight. This German design looked less like a paperclip and more like a tangled slinky that had given up on life. It was supposed to hold thicker stacks of paper with a kind of spiral tension. Instead, it mostly confused people. You'd spend more time trying to figure out which way to insert the paper than actually clipping it. It's the IKEA of paper fasteners. Theoretically brilliant, practically exhausting. Now let's not forget the great coated paperclip experiment. At some point, manufacturers decided plain wire wasn't enough. They dipped clips in colored plastic coating, bright reds, greens, and blues. Supposedly, this helped prevent rust and made filing fun, because clearly what every office needed was more whimsy. The real result, a bunch of melted plastic gunk if you accidentally left one near a hot radiator, or little colored flakes stuck to your papers. Still, the rainbow-coated clip became a staple in schools. Because if you're going to staple together your homework substitute, might as well do it in neon pink. At this point, you might be wondering why so many designs. Why so much energy spent bending wire in slightly different ways? The answer is simple. Capitalism loves a minor variation. If one company had the gem, another company had to have something else. Otherwise, how do you market your product? You can't exactly run an ad campaign saying, "Our paperclip is identical, but..." slightly shinier. So you invent new angles, new curves, new ergonomic grips, even if none of them work better. It's the same reason we have 300 different phone chargers or 19 flavors of bottled water. Humanity just can't stop itself. But here's the kicker. Despite all these attempts, the classic gem paperclip never lost its crown. It survived every competitor. It ignored every patent war. It just quietly did its job. Year after year, decade after decade, the gem clip has remained the world's default. Because sometimes the simplest idea really is the best. And because, let's be honest, no one has the energy to debate which clip is superior when all you want to do is finish filing and go home. So what have we learned from this tedious journey through alternative designs? 1. Humans are very creative when it comes to solving problems that don't exist. 2. Marketing departments will hype anything if you let them. And 3. No matter how many serrated, triangular, or spiral inventions we come up with, we always end up back with the humble gem. It's the stationery equivalent of plain white bread. Not glamorous, not exciting, but somehow eternal. So as you let your eyes grow heavy tonight, you can drift off knowing there are dozens, maybe hundreds, of forgotten paperclip variations gathering dust in museum drawers. Each one a tiny reminder that even the dullest object can inspire human ambition and then be completely ignored. Welcome back. If you've somehow resisted sleep so far, you're doing better than most. But don't worry, this part will almost certainly tip you over the edge, because tonight we're exploring the alternate lives of paperclips. Yes, beyond simply holding papers together, the humble clip has been drafted into all sorts of unexpected and deeply underwhelming tasks. Some practical, some ridiculous, and most of them mildly disappointing. So get comfortable, maybe tuck the blanket a little higher, because we're about to spend the next while talking about how people have used a bent wire to do everything except its intended job. Let's start with the most famous, the reset button trick. We've all been there. You buy a shiny new piece of electronics, a modem, a Wi-Fi router, maybe a suspiciously complicated printer, and then one day it freezes, panic sets in. Until you notice the tiny hole labeled RESET. And what do you use? A paperclip. Always a paperclip. Nothing else seems to fit quite as perfectly. Toothpicks break. Safety pins stab you. Pens leave ink blobs. But a paperclip, bent into a neat little poking tool, slides right in. Honestly, the modern tech industry owes more to office supplies than it admits. If every paperclip in the world vanished tomorrow, at least half the routers on Earth would remain permanently frozen. Civilization would collapse, not from climate change, not from war, but because nobody could reset the Wi-Fi. Now let's glide gently into the second classic, lockpicking. Yes, paperclips have been immortalized in countless spy movies as the universal skeleton key. James Bond, Jason Bourne, even your average YouTube DIY channel, all showing off the bend and jiggle method. Of course, in reality, lockpicking with a paperclip is not as easy as Hollywood suggests. Actual locksmiths will tell you that unless you have infinite patience, good lighting, and an unhealthy relationship with tiny metal pins, it probably won't work. But the fantasy lives on. There's something poetic about it, really. The world's most boring object moonlighting as a tool of espionage. Like finding out your quiet neighbor spends weekends as an amateur trapeze artist. Speaking of moonlighting, paperclips are also the world's most convenient SIM card ejectors. If you've ever upgraded your phone and had to swap out that little tray, you know the struggle. Manufacturers give you a special tool, which of course immediately vanishes into the black hole of lost objects. But the paperclip, always nearby, always ready. It bends, it pokes, it saves the day. Honestly, the fact that Apple hasn't tried to patent a premium SIM ejecting accessory for $49.99 is shocking. Then again, maybe they realized everyone already has a drawer full of perfectly good clips. Let's float to another side roll. Makeshift jewelry. Yes, somewhere out there a bored student has twisted paperclips into bracelets, or earrings, or possibly a very avant-garde necklace. It's the universal craft project of last resort. Cheap, slightly uncomfortable, and guaranteed to confuse your grandmother. In fact, there was even a brief fad in the 1970s of stringing colored plastic-coated clips together as fashion accessories. Bold, questionable, slightly itchy, but technically history.